Gary Lineker, the gentleman, marksman of English football, and the Three Lions. The rain fell heavily on Merseyside as 16-year-old Gary Lineker walked through the Everton training ground for the first time, his kit bag slung over his shoulder, his heart racing with nervous excitement. His mother had always told him he had a gift, something special that set him apart from other boys in his age group, but now, standing in the presence of professional footballers, that confidence wavered. The Everton Youth Academy was notoriously difficult to crack, a production line that had produced some of England's finest talents. One slip, one moment of self-doubt, and he'd be forgotten, just another promising kid who hadn't quite made it. The coaching staff watched him during early training sessions with expressions that revealed nothing. Lineker was quick, intelligent, possessing an almost instinctive ability to find space in crowded penalty areas. But he was also slight, not particularly powerful, lacking the physical dominance that many coaches believed was essential for a top striker. One coach pulled him aside after a training session, his expression stern. "You're talented, Gary, no question. But you need to understand something. At this level, talent isn't enough. You need mental strength, determination, and an unwillingness to accept mediocrity. Can you provide that?" "Yes, sir. I'll work harder than anyone else here." The coach nodded, apparently satisfied with the answer, but Lineker understood the message. Every day would be a test. Every match an opportunity to prove his worth or confirm doubts. There was no room for complacency, no guarantee that potential would translate into success. The academy years were brutally competitive. Lineker trained obsessively, staying behind long after teammates had left, working on his positioning, his first touch, his finishing. He watched strikers who'd come before him, the successful ones and the failures, trying to understand what separated them. The successful ones, he realized, shared a common trait. They made intelligent decisions in crucial moments. They didn't panic when chances came. They executed with clinical precision. His breakthrough into Everton's first team came gradually, through substitute appearances and reserve matches, before finally earning a start. The opposing defenders had clearly been briefed to be physical with the young striker, to use their bodies to unsettle him, to make him understand that the top flight was a different level of intensity. Lineker refused to be intimidated. He ran his lines perfectly, found pockets of space, and when the chance came, he finished with the composure of a seasoned professional. 1 goal, and Everton won 3-0, he'd announced himself. The following seasons at Everton established Lineker as more than just a talented prospect. He was becoming a consistent, reliable goal-scorer. 35 goals in 99 appearances for the club represented extraordinary efficiency. But Lineker's greatest strength wasn't just his goal-scoring ability, it was his character. He was polite, respectful, never diving despite the physical challenges opponents presented, never losing his temper or retaliation despite provocations. In an era of increasingly cynical football, where players regularly feigned injuries and disputed referees' decisions, Lineker stood out for his integrity. After a particularly brutal match where opposing defenders had roughed him up consistently without consequences, a teammate asked him why he never retaliated, why he never complained to the referee. "Because it changes nothing," Lineker replied, his voice calm and philosophical. "Retaliation only gets me sent off or suspended. It doesn't help the team. I just focus on playing well, on scoring goals. That's my response. But doesn't it frustrate you? Being kicked and pushed around?" "Of course it does. But I've learned that maintaining composure is a strength, not a weakness. The best response to rough treatment is a goal." The philosophy would define his entire career. Across his entire playing life, Lineker would never receive a red card, never be sent off, a remarkable achievement in an era of passionate, physical football. His discipline wasn't born from passivity, but from intelligence, understanding that losing his temper would only hurt his team and diminish his effectiveness. By his mid-20s, Lineker had established himself as one of England's finest strikers. The national team recognized his potential, and he began representing his country with the same consistency and professionalism he displayed at Everton. His composure in international matches impressed Bobby Robson, the England manager, who saw in the young striker qualities that transcended mere goal-scoring ability. Lineker played with intelligence, movement, and an almost selfless willingness to work for teammates. But as Lineker entered the prime years of his career, a restlessness began to develop. Everton, whilst a great club, hadn't won significant silverware in recent seasons. The ambition that burned within him demanded more, demanded the chance to compete for the biggest prizes, to test himself against the world's elite. When Tottenham Hotspur came calling with an offer that would make Lineker the most expensive British player in history, he knew the decision before it was even formally presented. Leaving Everton proved more difficult than he'd anticipated. The supporters had embraced him, and he'd become a symbol of the club's hopes. But Lineker understood that careers had limited windows, and his was open now. At 25, he was at his physical peak, ready for a new challenge, ready to elevate his career to the next level. The move to White Hart Lane would prove transformative. White Hart Lane represented a significant step up in Lineker's career. Tottenham were ambitious, historically one of England's great clubs, and the move signalled that he was now competing at the absolute highest level. The pressure was immense. At nearly £2 million, he was expected to deliver immediately, to justify the faith and the financial investment. Lineker thrived under pressure. His first season at Spurs produced immediate results. 20 goals in all competitions announced that Tottenham's investment was already paying dividends. But more than the goals themselves, it was the manner of his play that impressed observers. He linked play brilliantly with teammates, created space for others, and most importantly, maintained the discipline and composure that had defined his Everton years. When opponents tried to provoke him, he ignored them, focusing entirely on his performance. A rival defender, frustrated by being repeatedly outmaneuvered by Lineker's intelligent movement, eventually lost patience and fouled him viciously. The referee blew the whistle, but showed only a yellow card. Lineker got up without complaint, dusted himself off, and jogged back to position. The next time he received the ball, he beat the same defender with a deft piece of skill and fired past the goalkeeper with clinical precision. As he celebrated, he made a point of looking directly at the defender, a subtle reminder that excellence was the best response to aggression. The Spanish connection came through Terry Venables, the charismatic manager who'd revolutionized Tottenham's approach with continental tactics and positional play. Venables saw in Lineker a player ideally suited to Spanish football, intelligent, technical, disciplined. When Barcelona came calling, offering Lineker the opportunity to play at one of the world's greatest clubs, Venables encouraged him to go. "You're ready for this, Gary. Barcelona is the pinnacle. You'll learn things there that will make you an even better player. But I've just settled at Tottenham. We're building something special here, and you'll come back a complete striker. Trust me." The move to Camp Nou in the summer of 1986 came with enormous expectations and significant challenges. Barcelona were one of Europe's elite, accustomed to winning, with a style of play that demanded technical perfection and tactical intelligence. Lineker's first days in training were eye-opening. The level of skill, the movement, the quality of passing, it was several notches above anything he'd experienced in England. His Barcelona debut brought immediate pressure. The expectations from supporters accustomed to seeing world-class strikers were sky-high. Every touch was scrutinized, every missed chance magnified. Lineker's response was characteristically professional. He adapted to the Spanish style with remarkable speed, Understanding that his role in Barcelona's system was different from what he'd been accustomed to in England, rather than being the focal point of every attack, he was one part of a complex system where movement and positioning were as important as pure finishing ability. A friendship developed with Terry Venables during this period that transcended the professional relationship between manager and player. Venables, having briefly managed Barcelona before, understood the cultural and tactical challenges Lineker faced. The two would discuss not just football, but philosophy, the nature of competition, what separated good players from great ones. The difference between England and Spain, Venables explained one afternoon, is that here they value intelligence over intensity. In England, we celebrate graft and hard work. Here, they celebrate elegance and precision. You have both qualities, Gary, that makes you special. The Barcelona experience, lasting just 2 seasons before returning to Tottenham, proved transformative. Lineker scored 28 goals in 60 appearances, contributing significantly to a Copa del Rey victory. But beyond the statistics, he'd evolved as a player and as a person. He'd learned a different way of approaching the game, a different philosophy that emphasized intelligence and positioning alongside traditional striking virtues. His return to Tottenham in 1988 coincided with a resurgence at the club. Under new management, Spurs were ambitious, and Lineker's Barcelona education made him even more valuable. The remaining years of the 1980s saw him establish himself as the Premier League's most consistent goalscorer, with seasons of exceptional productivity becoming routine. But the tension between Lineker's club achievements and his international ambitions began to crystallize. England hadn't won the World Cup since 1966, and though the team had progressed through various tournaments, a deep run in a World Cup remained elusive. In 1988, as England prepared for the European Championship, Lineker found himself increasingly viewing his career through the lens of international success. Club trophies mattered, certainly, but representing England in a major tournament, helping his country reclaim lost glory, that was the ultimate ambition. Bobby Robson had identified Lineker as crucial to England's plans. The striker's intelligence, his composure under pressure, his ability to finish clinical chances, these qualities were exactly what England needed. As the 1989 season progressed, Lineker focused intensely on maintaining his fitness and form, knowing that the approaching World Cup would define his career legacy. His relationship with the media also evolved during this period. Lineker understood that as England's primary striker, he was more than just a footballer. He was a public figure, a representative of his country. The pressure to behave impeccably, to maintain composure, to represent English values with dignity, added another layer of responsibility. But Lineker embraced this role, understanding that his conduct off the pitch was as important as his performance on it. The 1990 World Cup in Italy represented the culmination of years of international ambition. Gary Lineker arrived in the tournament as England's primary goal-scoring hope, with the entire nation's expectations resting on his shoulders. At 29, he was at his physical and mental peak, ready for the biggest stage in football. Bobby Robson had built a team around him, understanding that Lineker's intelligence and composure would be crucial in high-pressure matches. England's opening matches demonstrated their quality and Lineker's crucial role. Against Ireland, he provided a masterclass in intelligent movement, reading the game perfectly, positioning himself where danger was most likely to occur. His finishing was clinical, but more impressive was his ability to drop deep, link play, and create space for teammates. The performances drew praise from observers who recognized that Lineker had evolved beyond being merely a goal-scorer. He'd become a complete striker. The tournament progressed with England performing steadily, neither dominating nor struggling significantly. Lineker continued to accumulate goals, his tally growing with each match. But as England progressed deeper into the competition, The pressure intensified exponentially. The quarterfinals, semi-finals, and potentially the final all lay ahead, each demanding absolute perfection. Lineker felt this pressure acutely, understanding that his performance would define not just his career, but his place in English football history. Against West Germany in the semi-final, England faced one of the tournament favourites. The match was tense, tactical, with both teams understanding the significance of the occasion. For 90 minutes, neither side could break the deadlock. Extra time arrived, and both teams pressed forward desperately, seeking that crucial goal that would send them to the final. Lineker had numerous chances but couldn't find the finishing touches he'd shown throughout the tournament. The match went to penalties, and England lost their World Cup dream, ending in heartbreak. In the dressing room afterwards, Lineker sat in silence, unable to process the disappointment. Robson approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Gary, you played beautifully today. That's not a failure. But I didn't score. I had chances and I didn't take them. Now we're going home. Sometimes football is cruel, but you did everything right. Everything. You should be proud." Lineker struggled to accept this perspective. In his mind, success in football was defined by goals and trophies. A semi-final exit, regardless of performance, felt like failure. But as the initial shock subsided and he reflected on the tournament, a different perspective emerged. He'd scored 6 goals, joint top scorer alongside others, and his performances had been among the tournament's finest. His professionalism and conduct had impressed observers worldwide. He'd represented England with absolute dignity. The consolation came in the third-place playoff against Italy. England won, and Lineker scored again, ensuring that whilst the tournament hadn't brought the ultimate glory, his individual performance had been exceptional. The bronze medal meant little to him emotionally, but it represented that England had at least finished on a positive note. Returning to Tottenham, Lineker focused on what he could still control: club success. The ambition to win a major trophy had never diminished, and he threw himself into the 1991 season with renewed intensity. Spurs reached the FA Cup semi-final, and for a moment it seemed that trophy success might finally arrive. But they lost to Manchester United in a replay, heartbreak compounding his disappointment at the World Cup. The realization began to crystallize. He might retire without winning a major trophy. The thought was devastating, but it also clarified his perspective. Lineker had achieved things that most footballers could only dream of: world-class performances at the highest level, international caps, individual accolades. But he'd never held a trophy aloft, never experienced the collective joy of winning something that mattered. His relationship with Bobby Robson deepened during this period. The England manager became almost a mentor figure, someone Lineker could confide in about his frustrations and ambitions. After England played a friendly, Robson invited Lineker to his office. "I'm going to manage PSV Eindhoven next season," Bobby announced. "And I want you to know that managing you for England has been one of the highlights of my career. You're not just a great footballer, Gary. You're a great person. Thank you, boss. You've made me a better player by believing in me. No, I've simply recognized what was already there. Your integrity, your intelligence, your refusal to compromise your principles, those things are rarer than goal-scoring ability. Never lose them." The friendship between the two men, forged through competition and mutual respect, exemplified what Lineker's career had become about: not just the goals, but the manner in which they were achieved, the character demonstrated through adversity, the standards maintained when shortcuts were available. As the 1991 season progressed, Lineker's thoughts turned increasingly towards the future. At 30, he recognized that his peak would soon pass. The physical demands of professional football would eventually catch up with him. The question wasn't whether to retire, but when and on what terms. He wanted his final years to be defined by excellence, not decline, by performing at his peak rather than gradually diminishing. His consistency at Tottenham had been remarkable. Season after season, he'd delivered 20-plus goals with clockwork regularity. But he wanted more. He wanted to win something significant, to cap his career with tangible success. The FA Cup remained the most realistic trophy, and as the 1991 season progressed, Lineker focused entirely on that objective. Tottenham reached the final, their first appearance in the competition's showcase match in years. The opponent was Nottingham Forest, a skilled team with a respectable tradition. Walking out at Wembley, Lineker felt the weight of his entire career focused on 90 minutes. This was it. This was his chance to finally win the trophy that had eluded him. The FA Cup final at Wembley unfolded like a carefully choreographed drama, each moment carrying extraordinary weight. 90,000 people filled the stadium, and millions more watched across the nation, understanding that this was more than just another match. For Lineker, it was the culmination of everything, years of professionalism, of discipline, of excellence pursued with meticulous consistency. This was his final opportunity for glory. Nottingham Forest, managed by the legendary Brian Clough, presented a stern challenge. They were tactically disciplined, physically strong, and determined to spoil Tottenham's day. The first half saw relatively even play, with chances at both ends, but neither team establishing clear dominance. Lineker moved with characteristic intelligence, finding pockets of space, creating opportunities for teammates, his every movement purposeful and economical. But the goal that would crown his career remained elusive. The second half intensified, both teams sensing that one moment of brilliance would likely decide the outcome. Lineker continued his intelligent work, but Nottingham Forest defended resolutely, denying the space that might create clear opportunities. The minutes ticked away, and Lineker felt the desperation mounting. This was his final chance. After this match, regardless of the outcome, he'd made a private decision to retire. His body was telling him that he couldn't sustain this level of performance indefinitely, and he refused to become a shadow of his former self. In the 83rd minute, with time running out, a corner kick presented itself. Tottenham attacked with desperate urgency, throwing bodies forward, demanding that one final moment of magic. The ball was delivered to the far post, where Paul Stewart rose above the defenders. His header found the back of the net with overwhelming force. Tottenham were one goal up, and the stadium erupted in celebration. Lineker, despite not scoring, celebrated with genuine joy. He understood that football was a team sport, that individual ambitions mattered less than collective success. But inside, a small voice whispered that he'd wanted to score, that this final trophy should bear his signature. Still, as Tottenham defended desperately through the remaining minutes, protecting their precious one-goal lead, he felt the moment approaching. With seconds remaining, Nottingham Forest launched one final attack, a desperate attempt to salvage the match. The ball reached the Tottenham penalty area, a dangerous moment that could extend the match or destroy Nottingham's dreams. But Tottenham cleared it, and the referee's whistle blew. The FA Cup was Tottenham's. After years of dominance without silverware, they'd finally won something significant. In the celebrations that followed, as teammates embraced and supporters sang, Lineker felt an unexpected emotion. Relief mixed with sadness. Relief that he'd finally won a major trophy, that his career wouldn't end trophyless. Sadness, because he knew this would be his final match, the final moment wearing Tottenham's colours, the final opportunity to experience this feeling of collective triumph. Standing on the Wembley stage as the trophy was lifted, Lineker clapped his teammates, genuinely pleased for them. But his mind was already drifting elsewhere, to the future beyond football, to the decision he'd already made. This was the perfect moment to exit. Trophy won, legacy secure, body still capable of performing at the highest level, but mind already sensing that the time had come to move forward. In the dressing room, as champagne sprayed and songs echoed, manager Terry Venables found Lineker sitting quietly, still processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. "Gary, you should be celebrating. We won." "I know, Terry. I'm happy, genuinely happy, but I want to tell you something private. This is my final match. I'm retiring." Venables' expression shifted from celebration to shock. "Retiring, Gary. You're only 32. You have years left." "I have nothing left to prove. I've achieved everything I set out to achieve. The trophy, the goals, the international caps. Now I want to leave at the peak, not wait until I'm a shadow of myself." The decision shocked everyone when it became public. Lineker's retirement, announced just days after the FA Cup triumph, left the football world stunned. He'd been one of the Premier League's most reliable goal scorers, a player who could perform at any level, a professional whose standards never wavered. Retiring at 32 seemed premature to observers, but Lineker had thought about it carefully, understanding that his body wouldn't maintain its current standard indefinitely. His final career statistics were remarkable: 48 goals in 80 matches for England, making him the Three Lions' all-time leading goalscorer. At club level, he'd scored over 300 goals across his career, an extraordinary achievement. But the numbers, whilst impressive, didn't capture the true nature of his legacy. Lineker had changed perceptions about what it meant to be a professional footballer. His absolute refusal to receive a red card, his dignified response to provocation, his commitment to conduct himself with integrity, these had become hallmarks of his career. Years after retirement, when asked to reflect on his career, Lineker would speak not primarily about goals or trophies, but about the principles that had guided him. He'd seen talented players destroy themselves through discipline problems, through poor decision-making, through allowing their emotions to override their intelligence. He'd deliberately chosen a different path, understanding that whilst individual talent was important, character was what ultimately defined a career. The post-playing career brought new opportunities. Broadcasting, analysis, business ventures, Lineker transitioned smoothly into these areas, applying the same professionalism and intelligence that had defined his playing career. But football remained his true love, and his involvement with the sport continued through various capacities. His legacy at Tottenham remained significant. The FA Cup triumph of 1991 became defined by the players who won it. But Lineker's contribution, both direct and indirect, had been essential. His presence, his standards, his leadership had elevated everyone around him. Young players who'd played alongside him spoke of his influence decades later, of how his professionalism had set the tone for the entire team. The gentleman Marksman, as he became known, had achieved something rare in professional football. He'd maintained absolute integrity whilst competing at the highest level, had pursued excellence without compromising his principles, and had retired on his own terms, at his peak, having won the major trophy that had eluded him for so long. Gary Lineker's career proved that greatness and character were not mutually exclusive, that you could be ruthlessly competitive whilst remaining fundamentally decent. That legacy was built not just on what you achieved, but on how you achieved it.